Carlos is a former PhD student of mine who made his PhD on design and control of self-organizing systems, and who now works at the National University of Mexico, where he's building up his own research group, and will tell us about his latest research there.
Yeah. Well, thanks Francis for inviting me, and all of you for coming. I'll speak a bit an introduction about how living technology can help us solve lots of different problems in cities. So I'll speak first about motivations and what do we mean by living technology, which at the end is a new name for something that many of us have been doing for several years. And then I'll mention different areas of urban problems where living technology can help us improve our situation. Then I'll review a bit ways in which this can be achieved, and then some discussion. So for the first time in the history of our planet, more than half of people living in cities, and it's expected that by 2050 this will increase to 70%. We will have 1 million people moving into urban areas every week all around the world. And this huge migration that's unprecedented is mainly motivated by all the advantages that urban areas have to offer. I mean, usually in cities you have better opportunities, higher salaries. In some senses they might be more energy efficient, so there are lots of attractions for people. Better education, better lifestyle, but also such a high concentration of people creates lots of problems. So how can we deal with this city growth so that the cities do not become cancers and kind of suffer from their own success? Now, most of the problems that we face in cities, since they are constantly growing, they are problems which are dynamic, they are changing. So we cannot use traditional approaches that try to solve static problems. These are non-stationary problems. So the complexity of the problems limits the effectiveness of traditional techniques. If we try to optimize solution for a problem, by the time we implement it, then the problem changes and it's obsolete. Now, we can define living technology as that technology which is based on the core features of living systems, which means that it's adaptive, it learns, it evolves, it's robust, it's autonomous, it's self-repairing, self-reproducing. And people who define this consider within the artificial life community, define basically technology as technology which has at least some of these properties. So, and they also distinguish between primary and secondary living technologies. Primary living technology would be something that you call, like, you would consider a real living system, like, for example, genetically modified or genetically engineered bacteria to produce certain medicine. That would be living technology because the bacteria are alive, and it's technology because we engineer them for our own purposes. Or if you develop some artificial living system for some other purposes, like for carbon sequestration, and there are many proposed applications, but most of the living technologies that we already have, there would be secondary living technologies, which basically use living systems as components of their technology. So for example, a city, you can already define it as secondary living technology because humans and animals and plants interact as parts of these larger technological systems. And the metaphor of cities as organisms is, I mean, it's not anything new. People have been describing cities as organisms already for quite some time. Why? Because they grow, can describe certain metabolism. I mean, they transform energy and matter and information. They have an internal organization. They have transportation networks, and also the communications have been described as nervous systems. Even from the 1840s, the popular newspapers would describe telegraphs as the nervous systems of the planet, even when they didn't know how the nervous system worked. But the metaphor was already there. For example, Miller, in his definition of living systems, which have how many properties? 18 properties? 19? He doesn't mention cities per se, but he does mentions like societies. And if you look at cities, then you could say that they fulfill all his 18 properties of living systems. And also, for example, Mike Batty recently wrote that the scientific study of cities is transforming from a more engineering or industrially oriented description of thinking cities as machines, and more to thinking of cities as organisms. I mean, it doesn't really matter what they really are. What we have to decide is whether the different descriptions are useful for our purposes. And it seems that given the complexity of cities, it's more useful, more fruitful to describe them as organisms than as machines, simply because a machine has a predefined behavior and cities do not. They adapt, they are responsive, they have memory, and many other properties shared with other living systems. And of course there are differences between cities and biological systems. I mean, they fall within different universality classes, like the scaling laws in biological systems for some properties are the same as for cities, like I think for metabolism, but then there are some other scaling laws that are not universal with living systems. But still, since cities are constantly adapting, they share, let's say, more similarities than differences with living systems.
Sorry, I know the scaling laws which don't work.
I don't remember precisely, but it's the economies of scale that make it, I mean, for living organisms, the more, let's say, there's a scaling law that relates like the mass to the energy. So the larger the organism, the more energy it requires the metabolism. And for cities, it's I think so exponential, meaning that the larger cities require less energy per capita. So the larger the cities,
But we've also learned from one of the talks at the conference at the ULB that the scaling laws may not be as universal as the first study seemed to imply.
But one of the, I mean, because they study, I don't know, like 20-something properties, and some of these didn't change, and some of them changed for the UK.
Yeah,
so
but generally they were very small.
So
I think it was only patent or something like that gave an exploit that was clearly different from one. Because scaling with a factor of 1, that's trivial.
But also it depends. It depends a lot on how do you define the cities, how do you define the urban area. So that's also a tricky thing. That was another thought, that they were varying. Okay, what do we want to call a city? And depending on how you vary that, you get different results. So.
Yeah, but they tried out many different ways, and none of them gave the results of the original Battencourt and West studies.
So I mean that's still under debate, but I mean we can agree that most of our problems are non-stationary, and living systems have to deal with non-stationary environments. So there, I mean, given all these similarities, we can see lots of promise in living technology to solve urban problems. Basically because if technology is able to adapt, to learn, to evolve, then they will be able to adapt, to learn, to evolve to urban problems as they change. And I mean, as I was mentioning, this is not something entirely new. It's, I mean, just the terminology of leading technology is new. Stafford Beer in the early 70s helped the Chilean government of Salvador Allende to develop the project CyberSyn, which was like a nervous system for the country based on telex, which is, I don't know if the young ones here know what telex is.
A very primitive version of email.
So you could see it more like a fax, I think.
No, because you can't send any graphical material.
Yeah, well it was useful for remote communication, sending and receiving text messages. So they made a whole network, and they had a control room in Santiago, in the capital, which looked like the lair of the villain of a James Bond film. One of these that rose up at the end of the film for no apparent reason. I don't know, that's the way James Bond films used to be in the 70s. So they received in this brain room or control room information from all of the country, of the factories, of the cities, where they were producing what were the requirements, their stocks. So there was a very big strike against the government of truck drivers. There were only less than 100 truck drivers loyal to the regime, and still with such few drivers they were able to sustain the stock of the country, because they had everyday real-time information of where were the produce and where it was required and where were the trucks. So like that they were able to withstand the strike, and then when the coup d'etat of Pinochet came to be, then I mean that was the end of this project. And more recently, IBM has been doing lots of marketing of the smart cities initiatives as part of their Smarter Planet campaign. There's also in Europe the Future ICT flagship project, which has been very popular. It has something like 1,500 researchers supporting it, mainly in Europe. There's also something called the Earth 2.0 project, which uses similar ideas, and also in Germany, people working with the concept of organic computing, which is a very similar idea. So, one of the largest problems in cities is mobility. How do you get people and products from one place to another? And of course, well, first of all, we can identify 8 different factors for mobility. First of all is the requirements for transportation. If you don't need to move from one place to another, then there's no mobility problem. So that's why people promote home commuting or living at least close to your school or work. Also, people speak about local produce, so that they don't have to transport so many products. But of course, this is not always possible. So, however, the more we reduce the transportation requirements, then the better mobility we will have. Another factor is the schedule distribution. If everybody enters school or work at the same time, then you have rush hours. And if you have a flexible schedule where people can choose, let's say, to enter work between 6 and 10, and then to leave between 2 and 6, let's say to work 8 hours straight, then they have at least 4 hours where everybody's at the office, and then the rush hour, instead of everybody entering at 8 and leaving at 4, they would diffuse and you would expect less of a rush hour. Of course, the more passengers, the more vehicles you have on the roads, the worse mobility you will have, and its complement is the capacity. The more capacity you have, then you can transport more people, more vehicles. However, there's well-known behavior that the more roads you build, the more cars you attract, because then it's like, oh, now we have more capacity, then we can put more vehicles on those roads. So many urbanists are against increasing the capacity, and actually here in Brussels they reduce the capacity, trying to demotivate people from using their cars, but it seems it's not enough. And of course, if people are selfish and they kind of change lanes too much and do not respect the traffic rules, that's worse for mobility than if there are some agreements on which side of the street to drive and things like that. Infrastructure and technology is very important, because if you have more infrastructure and the technology is more efficient, then you can improve the mobility. Also, the social aspect is very important, because in many countries to own a car is something aspirational, like a sign of status that you have some economic success. So, especially in developing countries, in Latin America, in China, in India, especially young people, they are bombarded by the media, like, oh, buy a car, buy a car, buy a car, even if they don't really have the money or the needs, and that really affects the mobility. Still, in many countries, it's becoming socially acceptable or even fashionable not to own a car and to use alternative modes of transport. And finally, the planning and regulation is extremely relevant for cities. We heard one of the talks about planning in Israel and how it's not followed, because there's an interesting phenomenon that they have a plan and say, okay, this city will grow in this direction, then the price of the land of the planned region increase, and then the developers don't want to build it because it's too expensive. So they go outside the planned region, and then they lobby so that they let them build in that area where they bought the land 10 times cheaper, and then they get the permit, and then something like how the cities are grow into unplanned territory. So it's not only to have plans, but to fulfill them. And of course, in many cities there's not even a plan, so then cities grow as, according to the interests of the local builders and contractors and developers. So let me mention some examples of how can living technology improve mobility of cities. I mean, I mentioned these 8 factors just to give you an idea of the complexity of the problem. I mean, you cannot have like a solution to mobility with just one project, because there are so many factors interrelated that in order to have considerable improvement in mobility, you need several projects to contemplate all of these different factors in parallel. But one of the things we have worked in is on improving public transportation systems. In collaboration with Luis Pineda, we studied a common phenomena that, I mean, it's well known, but it didn't really have like a general name, so we named it the equal headway instability, which is a common problem in rail, trams, buses, metros, bus rapid transits, even elevators have this problem, which means it's the following. According to theory, passengers will wait less time at stations if vehicles arrive with an equal headway. Headway is the time between each vehicle arrives at the station, is the time interval. So, assuming that vehicles have an equal headway, then if passengers arrive randomly, not even assuming that some stations have more demand than others, we can assume that some stations will have more demand, so then this vehicle will be delayed because there were too many passengers here. So then the headway with the previous one increases, and with the one behind is reduced. So then at the next station, it's a high probability that there will be more passengers. so that it will be even further delayed and this will catch up. So you get a plateau formation, that's precisely the instability of the headway. You have positive feedback loops that amplify the delays. If one vehicle delays a bit, then it gets worse. And I remember when I was living here in Brussels, that's also a common phenomenon. And to the point that here the bus line 34, you have 3 buses per hour, and they come one after the other. I mean, there should be 20 minutes headway, and still they manage to come together. So, I mean, it's a pervasive problem, and it's because that's where the system tends to. It's just unstable to have equal headways. Small delays amplify, and then you end up with groups of vehicles. And of course, it's extremely inefficient because most passengers have to wait a long time before any of the vehicles pass. And usually, like in bus rapid transit or metro systems where you don't have passing, the first one is very slow, and then it reaches a station, and people cannot get out, and then other people want to get in. And when it finally leaves, there's another one, and it's empty. Let me show you a video of Mexico City's metro. You might notice some people coming in through the windows.
What it seems to be. In your clothes.
Is this a rock channel or?
In Mexico City, so that's
No, but precisely at rush hour, when you want to have more effective service, then the trains cannot move. So it's extremely inefficient. So, well, what we proposed last year is a self-organizing method that actually turns out to be better than the theoretical optimum. And how can something be better than the theoretical optimum? Well, because the theory is wrong. The theory focuses on minimizing waiting time at stations and then assumes that the travel times will be unaffected. And it happens that is not the case. You have equal waiting times at stations. I mean, if you force equal headways on the vehicles, there will be for sure some stations that will be idling in order to keep up with the headway with the busier stations, and you might have some vehicles having to leave the station before all the passengers are served. So in this solution, the vehicles are able to adapt by balancing the time since the previous vehicle left the station, the distance to the vehicle behind, and the number of passengers at the station. So it's enough flexible so that they can serve better the demand of the passengers, and if there aren't many passengers, they will tend to leave the station, but still without collapsing the system into plateaus of vehicles. So even when passengers will wait for a bit longer at stations, once they board a vehicle, they will reach their destination faster. So this is something that is known as slower is faster effect, which at the end leads to suboptimal performance. And also, it's not a predefined solution because you don't really know what will be the demand at each station. Moreover, if it is changing constantly and you don't know where the vehicles will be at which time. So it just adapts locally to the demand and to the capacity of each vehicle, how full is each vehicle. And a very important thing is that the adaptation of the system matches the time scale at which the problem changes. For example, there are some adaptive traffic lights that adapt every half an hour or every hour, which is better than not adapting, but I mean, every traffic cycle you have different number of cars coming from each direction. So it's much better if your traffic lights adapt at the second scale and not at the minute scale. And it's the same. Well, it's the same for any system. If the adaptation matches the time scale of the problem change.
Yeah, but you can only adapt if you have sufficient time headway. If you don't, like here in Brussels, every minute you cannot adapt.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to stick synchronized flow.
Yeah.
Otherwise you get collapse.
Yeah. So, well, this all related to some of the work I developed here with Francis on self-organizing traffic lights, but let me first show you a simulation of the public transport system. So let me reduce the speed. So we start with equal gateways. Can you see it more or less? Well, there are 5 stations and 5 vehicles. And passengers arrive randomly. There are not that many passengers. Oh, sorry. That's not. Yeah. Here. So if you don't put any constraint very quickly for any passenger density you have on stable headways, and you can see here that the first vehicle is going very slow and all the other 4 are behind, almost empty. So this one is delaying everybody. And then we propose a method that forces the equal headways.
That means that the next one should not start before the one at the following station is left.
Basically, they all have a fixed waiting time at stations, and even if there are passengers trying to board, they have to wait.
How do you implement this?
Sorry?
How do you implement this? You must have people who stop people
That's still to be seen.
That's another point.
If you put it in the metro, it's automatic closure of doors.
No,
People don't let it close. Yeah.
I
Sorry,
can but raise on ladies.
So here you can see that the headways are quite stable. I mean, all the trains have very similar frequency, so you have equal headways, and the passenger delays is not that much. But then, if we let the system self-organize, even for this homogeneous scenario, you start losing the equal headways, but then the total delay time is reduced. And here, if you split the waiting times, you can see here that there are more passengers waiting at the stations, and this purple one is the waiting time at stations, which is increased. It does increase. That's consistent with the theory. Only that they will spend much less time at the trains.
So you mean the total time between the moment they arrive at the station and the moment they arrive at their destination diminishes?
Yes. Yeah. So that's why the slower is faster. You can see here that the delay is reduced. Even for this case, when you have like very regular stations, all of them have the same demand. You can move this to have, to have the trains starting not from homogeneous conditions. Let me also change the density at every station. You will have some with higher or lower demand, and you get actually very similar performance than in a very nice regular case where you can try to attempt to optimize something. And if you force the headways, then you cannot recover if you start from a situation without equal headways. And this you can start from a completely aggregated situation, like all the trains are here, and it manages to spread them nicely and to recover. So with the equal headway instability, it's like an inverted pendulum that you want trains to be like this, but any perturbation kicks you off the equal headways and collapses the system. And what we managed to do with this method is to, well, the analogy is not so much that you keep the balance, but you actually change the attractor so that now the headways are the new attractor. So now the system tends to the desired state.
And how do you do with anti-Fermat? Does that mean that things that have passed kind of slow down the ones that follow them?
Yeah, the usual pheromones, which are used by ant colonies to communicate via the environment. Usually ants, if they detect some food, they go back to the nest and leave a pheromone trail, and then the pheromone evaporates. So if more ants come, the trail is reinforced, and if it turns out that the food is gone or it wasn't such a good option, then it diffuses and it erases. So the pheromone concentration reduces with time. And these are antipheromones because the idea is the opposite. You have the antipheromone increasing on the rails, and then the trains erase.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just the same but inverted.
So, and the more things have passed erasing the pheromones, the less the next train will be inclined to speed up.
Yeah. Yes. So that's why they try to keep a balance between the train ahead and the train behind. Well, many of you already know this work on the traffic lights, but let me show for other people who don't know. This is a simulation of an abstract city. And usually cities are coordinated with a method called the green wave method. So we try to synchronize the traffic lights at the speed, expected speed of the cars. So for example, you can see that the cars going south and going east do not have to stop because the traffic lights are synchronized appropriately. But if you're going in the opposite direction, you have to stop every now and then. So in radial cities where people live in the suburbs, in the periphery, and work downtown, you just make the green wave in the mornings downtown and in the afternoons to the outskirts. So it's better than not having any coordination, but it has several drawbacks. For example, in Mexico City, you have traffic in all directions all day, so it doesn't. If you are against it, it's not useful, and also, if the traffic density is such that the cars cannot keep up with the expected speed, then you cannot catch the green wave, and you anyway have to stop, and that leads to long queues, and these long queues start blocking the streets. And I don't know if this is familiar to any of you. But it's
The yellow and box streets, you mean?
yeah, the cars are painted blue if they're moving and yellow if they're stopped.
Slowly everything is stopped.
Yeah. And now the self-organizing method, let's put the density we had at first. Each intersection has sensors and basically give preference to the street with a higher demand. So it starts forming platoons, which is a bit the opposite of what you want in public transport systems. Because public transport systems, you want to keep them apart, but with vehicles, you want to keep them together because it's easier to coordinate groups of several cars, let's say platoon of cars, than all the cars individually. So, for example, if you have 100 cars, it's easier to coordinate 10 groups of 10 cars than 100 independent cars. Just computationally, it's much easier.
It's a bit like making a train out of individual cars.
Yeah. So after some time in this idealized city, the traffic lights, the vehicles actually make the green wave, but then the traffic lights are also promoting the formation of platoons which can flow through the city because they trigger the green light before they reach the intersection. And then if we increase the density even a bit higher, where we got the traffic jam, of course you have some yellow cars, meaning that they're stopping because I mean, you have more vehicles than capacity on the streets. Just because of the density, you cannot have a free flow as you could with lower densities. But you have actually a maximum flow, meaning that all the intersections are being used by vehicles constantly, so you don't have any wasted resources. So I mean, it's not only that it doesn't block, it is that it is as optimal as it could be. You cannot have higher flow than this, because I mean all the intersections are being used constantly. Now let's put some more realistic density. It's more like Mexico City on a Friday evening. So, of course, I mean, there's almost no space, and in this simulation, if there's no space, you cannot move. So that's why almost everything is yellow, but still there's a formation of groups of spaces which are a bit dual to the formation of platoons, which move in the opposite direction than traffic. So, for example, this street goes to the east, and then you have the formation of spaces that move in the opposite direction. So also you don't have like, you move 1 meter and then you stop, and then you move another meter and then you stop, but you move something like a block, and then you stop for a while, and then you move for a long time. And also these spaces coordinate at the intersection so that they obstruct as much as possible. I mean, you still have flows because the method prevents the intersections from being blocked. Now, there are several other applications for mobility that living technology can offer. So, for example, real-time information systems can give us, I mean, they already give us information to make better decisions. There's lots of research on how to have different sensors and how to integrate different sensors, because you have, for example, radars or cameras or GPS data. How can you process all this information? How can you integrate to have better understanding of what's the traffic state? Not only what's the traffic state, but also trying to predict a bit what will be traffic state. Because imagine that you have two routes. One of them has a traffic jam, and lots of people have Waze or some other application that tells them, do not take this route, take the other route. So then everybody takes that route, and then that becomes congested. So, I mean, these systems have also to take that into consideration, to try to predict, according to the present state and with historic data, what will be the state, let's say, in half an hour, in order to give suggestions, and different suggestions to different users, even if they are going to the same route, to prevent these situations. There's also some work to develop communication between, automatic communication between vehicles, which in simulations they have shown that you can improve considerably flow in freeways, even if you have just 5 or 10% of vehicles using this system, meaning that they tell each other, oh, I had to reduce speed, so then you reduce speed, but they don't overreact. So they, I mean, what happens in freeways is that one vehicle slows down, and then the one behind slows even more, and the one behind slows even more, and then finally after 5 or 6 cars they have to stop. And of course you can also have real-time information for public transport, and this can also be applied for logistics, and there are lots of other applications. there's already the term called biologistics, which is precisely to use principles and properties of living systems for material flows. Why? Because living systems also have transport of material. So, I mean, from swarm intelligence to develop delivery routes, to some other methods that are adaptive on the spot. There are lots of different applications that are being developed in many areas, not only in distribution but also in freight navigation, and in airline navigation they still don't do it. They still try to control everything. And I mean, last week at the conference there were 2 or 3 talks that they were trying to propose solutions because they just have too much traffic, too much air traffic, especially in Europe and the States. Maybe more in Europe because they have less available airspace, and they just don't have the space. So if you want to predict everything, then you have to reshuffle, and it's not really feasible, and of course that costs lots of money and fuel and everything, and nobody's happy. You want everybody's flying.
What kind of methods do they use for these biologistic systems, pheromones or stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a paper almost accepted in Artificial Life that explaining all of this in more detail. So it's more like a literature review of what other people have proposed. And also, for example, some of the things that we did for public transportation systems could also work for air traffic control, for example. That instead of trying to force into slots, okay, you have this slot, and if you don't make it, then we need to find another slot, and then to shuffle slots, then to have the system to be more flexible and try to keep local separations. I think that would be much more effective. Well, the telecommunications is a huge field, and historically information technology has reduced considerable communication delays. I mean, sometimes we take it for granted that, I mean, we had a 4-hour conversation to the other side of the planet last night, and it's like, well, yeah, that's the way you do it. But I mean, less than 200 years ago, in order to get a message across the ocean, it would take, I don't know, the fastest ships would take 2 weeks or something like that. I mean, it was only with the first underwater telegraph cable that some information was able to be more or less real time between Europe and America. So, I mean, it has really changed our society. And of course, we have relevant information, we can make better decisions. I mean, 500 years ago, let's say in times when Mexico was New Spain, the news would take, I don't know, if they were fast, it was 3 months, and if not, it was a year. Also in times of the Empire of Genghis Khan, I mean, they would be horseback riding a year back to their capital and things like that. So, and of course, the speed of communication and the effectiveness of communication, the pervasiveness, is not only useful for citizens but also for our devices. And since these high speeds and high connectivity, they produce a very high complexity. So, I mean, these are problems that are also exhibiting these properties where you have shifting demands. So, I mean, the most used example is peer-to-peer networks, where you don't have a fixed network and it's adapting constantly with changes. So, more and more there's research on ad hoc networks, wireless networks, wireless sensor networks that are relying more and more on properties similar to living systems to fulfill a functionality, because you just cannot specify what will be the load of any telecommunication network or any computer network. Now, also related to the interest of the global brain, we can use these telecommunication networks with sensors and effectors to provide timely adaptive governance. So this is also related to the work we did here about self-organizing bureaucracies, and also what Marco Rodriguez and other people have been doing concerning collective decision making. And open data initiatives have benefited these projects a lot because I mean, the data is there, and then people can manipulate that data for purposes that were not necessarily the original intended. And also they can promote and increase citizen participation. Just a couple of months ago we had presidential elections in Mexico, and it was the case that the mass media would impose their favorite candidates on the population. And in the beginning of the year, actually, a colleague at UNAM made a study on Twitter. He had like minute-by-minute mood information, mining the tweets that mentioned the different candidates. And he would update on what would be the popularity status. So you could very well check the news and then see the history of the tweets for that day and see how what that candidate said on that day had affected his popularity on Twitter. So even when the mass media were bombarding people with biased information about the candidates, you could see that people were making their own decision based on all the non-censored information that was available on social networks, which was also, everybody was trying to manipulate everybody else. But I think that people were able to make a choice, because with mass media you just have one source of information. If citizens have multiple sources of information, then they are better informed, they can make better decisions, and they're also more inclined to participate. We had a project for citizen participation where people were reporting electoral irregularities, like people would come and offer them money for votes and things like that, or pictures of policemen giving away food for votes, and that's illegal in many ways. And we always knew that these things were going on, but with this project we got a sense of the magnitude at which they were doing it. And I mean, even when in our group, some lawyers made 3 reports and delivered it to the authorities to demand. I mean, nothing will happen, but I mean, we got like 6,000 different reports from all over the country, like documenting all the irregularities that they were, and people were very active because before these people were like, well, yeah, they're corrupt, but what can we do? And even if he didn't change the election, people were like, yeah, we have a voice, we can make a difference. So I think also in this way, technology can make our societies more democratic, because a few group of people cannot have control over the information as they have now. I mean, in Mexico still, the problem is that only 1/3 of the population has internet access. And a large part of that third is still not in voting age. So it did affect let's say the votes, they did change, but I mean, the next election in 6 years, I'm sure the election will be decided on the internet, as it has been the case in other countries which have more broader internet coverage. So this technology can also help not only to have more democratic societies, but safer societies, because we can have living technology, let's say, not only to assist the police, but also to have prompt response to emergencies, to catastrophes, if you don't have a centralized command center that has to tell everybody what to do, but the society or different urban systems can, with certain autonomy, adapt to different situations, then they will be able to recover to unforeseen situations much faster. And also, if you have urban sensors, not only about it's not only about having cameras everywhere, so when you have riots, you will be able to go and prosecute people, like in some island north of here. But also to have accountability. I mean, if you have open data and you have, let's say, sensors where you can see who and how spend which money, then let's say people will be less inclined to practice some corruption, which is quite common when you don't have this information processing. And also, artificial immune systems have been proposed to increase safety in different aspects. Also, we can think of artificial neural systems that, like the one in Chile, they can help increase the responsiveness of societies and cities to unforeseen situations. And we could also mention one of the latest books of Steven Pinker, where he claims that society has increased its safety with technology. So if we follow that rationale, we can see that this technology will help us have safer cities. In the sense that the chance of being murdered has been decreasing constantly. Another point is sustainability can be defined as the capacity to endure. It's not only about the environment, it's usually mentioned in the environmental context, but also you can have social sustainability and economical sustainability. I mean, if, for example, New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, it was able to endure socially, but not so much. I mean, they lost like half of their inhabitants. And of course, with economical crisis and all sorts of policy schemes that governments and banks like to play, we don't really have a sustainable economy. And also, if we focus on pollution and resources and efficiency, then there are many aspects which can be improved. So, for example, in this sense, there are many people who have been working on smart grids. I think there was a whole satellite just dedicated to smarter grids, how to deliver energy in a more robust way, how can you prevent blackouts, how can you recover from blackouts if you have them. So there's lots of research, and it's the same type of problem. It's changing constantly. In order to have a solution to that problem, the solution has to adapt at the same scale as the problem. There are also projects on adaptive rainwater collection. In economy, it's pretty easy. If you produce more than you consume, then you're sustainable. If you don't, you aren't. But I don't know if some markers ignore it or pretend to ignore it. You can also have adaptive organizations that will promote sustainability, and of course cooperation is a key element in sustainability. If not only people but organizations and countries do not cooperate, then it will be harder to endure. And of course, all the research in evolution of cooperation and how can different organizations cooperate is relevant in this area. Living technology can also contribute positively for our society and for our culture. we could say that technology has been increasing the carrying capacity of cities in the sense that, let's say, with the development of our agriculture, that just simply allowed for larger settlements. Just because before you couldn't have too many people living in one place, just because there wasn't enough food. Once you have agriculture, okay, you can have cities of more or less 1 million people. But still, you need to transport the food to the markets, and before it gets spoiled, and irrigation. So let's say during the whole agricultural age, the maximum size of cities was maybe 250,000 inhabitants and all over the world. And in some cities it would go a bit higher than that. Then with the Industrial Revolution, then we have railroads, so then you can bring food from farther distances. So that increased the current capacity of cities. And with all the technologies that we are having, it's the current capacity of cities is increasing even more. Not only the speed of transportation, it's also the costs, it's the production, information. So on the one hand, our cities are able to withstand more inhabitants, but still we have, say, a certain threshold around 20-30 million that's more or less where Tokyo, Mexico City have stabilized, and there are many other cities which are growing more or less to similar numbers, but they don't grow beyond that. But still, we could imagine that this will increase even more, like in the east coast of the United States, the region between Washington DC, New York, and Boston, they have all the potential to merge into a large urban area, precisely with technology. But of course you need adaptive technology if you are willing to have such large urban areas. And also, I mean, here in Europe, I mean, you have a big urban spot from Paris to Cologne. I mean, the whole of Belgium is almost a big city with a few gardens in the Ardennes. And since it has been shown that the larger the cities, the more innovation they can withstand. On the one hand, larger cities will accelerate more innovation, but also with technology, we can have the benefits of urban areas beyond the physical cities. I mean, just with internet, you can be living not precisely in an urban area. It also depends on how you define the city. But you can be living, let's say, 1 hour from a city or 6 hours from a city, but still have direct connection and contribute to the innovation of that city and get benefits from the innovation of that city. So the benefits of large urban areas are growing to a planetary scale. But with the internet, we're being able to share many of the aspects that were constraints to a neighborhood or to a city. Now these boundaries are being expanded for the whole planet, or let's say for a whole language, which is also becoming globalized. And also the work of Johan Bollen, which I understand he will give a seminar in the coming weeks on social moods. I mean, what many people have done so far is to detect social moods. But I'm sure that people in marketing are already working on controlling social moods. So how can we make people like our product? But I mean, if we understand that mechanism, we can also think, okay, how can we guide social mood into a positive social mood? How can we make people happier or more satisfied with their life? I mean, it could also be with economical aims. You can also make a business out of making people happy. It's not necessarily has to be independent of that. And also for steering healthier lifestyles, because one of the big challenges of our century is the chronic degenerative diseases. And these diseases, such as diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, they're so-called non-transmittable diseases because, I mean, if I shake the hands of somebody with cancer, I won't get cancer. Or, I don't know, if I get blood from somebody with diabetes, I will not get diabetes. So it's supposedly not contagious. However, the behaviors that increase the risk of all these diseases are contagious. And we are only beginning to understand how these take place. So the better we can steer the social behavior and we can intervene, for example, in this case of healthy or unhealthy social behaviors, we could try to develop social vaccines to prevent the propagation of unhealthy behaviors, which could be also related to drug addiction, and how could you inject positive social behaviors, which would be healthier lifestyles. So the better, I mean, the better we understand how is the social propagation of all these ideas, then the better we will be able to influence our society. And precisely, living technology is helping us to achieve this. Now, this was just like a huge catalog of some of the applications of living technology. But then, one of the ways to achieve this at a large scale is to use the concept of self-organization as a method for developing living technology. And it was precisely the topic of my PhD thesis here in Brussels, which is how can we build a self-organizing system so that it adapts to the changing demands of a problem, which we find in cities, these problems all around us every day. So instead of, what do we mean by a self-organizing system? Instead of focusing on solving a problem, we focus on designing the elements, so that the elements, by the interactions, they will adapt and find solutions to problems that will be changing constantly. So then when the problem changes, the system self-organizes and adapts to the new configuration. So, of course, this is a bit redundant if our problem is well defined and does not change, but for urban problems, this is very useful because we do not have to pre-specify the problem. Just like in the case of the traffic lights or the public transport, I don't need to know when the passengers will arrive. I don't need to know when the vehicles will arrive at an intersection. The system is constantly adapting to the current state, to the current demand, and gives an appropriate response for that situation. So it's constantly finding new solutions to problems which are not only NP hard, they could be exponentially hard, which is even harder, for which we have no hope of finding an optimal solution. Instead of seeking an optimal solution, we're just seeking to adapt at the scale at which the problem changes. And that's much better than trying to adapt and offering obsolete solutions before you can implement them. So, in my thesis, this methodology is described more extensively, but the main premise behind it is to design the components of a system using the terminology from multi-agent systems. And then instead of focusing on what's the state of the agents, we focus more on the interaction. And then we see which kind of interactions are positive and which interactions are negative. So we can call the positive interactions synergetic and the negative interactions friction. So it's a premise of the methodology, and it's actually a tautology, but it's very useful tautology to minimize friction and to maximize synergy, to increase the so-called satisfaction of the system, which is basically to improve the performance of the system. Why it's a tautology? Because we are defining the friction precisely in terms of interactions that decrease the satisfaction or the performance of the system. And we can use this using the concept of mediators to promote and constrain behaviors that will reduce friction and maximize synergy. So the main idea is to focus not only on the components of the system, but also on the interactions, and to try to categorize the positive interactions from negative interactions, and to reduce with mediators the negative interactions and promote the positive interactions. And I mean, we could ask ourselves how useful is it to call cities living systems, and I think beyond the philosophical discussion, if cities exhibit properties of living systems, then we will be more satisfied as citizens. We will have a higher quality of life if the cities are adapting, if our cities are learning, if they're evolving, so that we are better prepared to deal with our problems. And I mean, IBM has this campaign about smart cities, but being smart is not enough. You also have to adapt to changes in the environment, to learn and to evolve, and all these are properties of living systems. And well, also you can measure this in terms of information, and we can see living cities as an integration of technology and living systems, because precisely we are embedded within cities. So I think we have some time for questions.